I stared at the ancient Ming vase as it tumbled from the mantelpiece, watching 17 generations of my family's accumulated luck shatter into 1,000 glittering pieces on the marble floor. My stepmother's scream echoed through the mansion's grand foyer, but all I could do was smile. This time I knew exactly what I was destroying. Elena, what have you done? Victoria's voice cracked like a whip as she rushed toward the wreckage, her perfectly manicured hands hovering over the fragments, as if she could somehow piece together 3 centuries of mystical fortune. Do you have any idea what you've just destroyed our family's luck? I finished calmly, brushing imaginary dust from my hands. Oh, I know exactly what I've done. The color drained from her face. Behind her, my stepsister Clarissa emerged from the drawing room, her mouth agape. My father appeared at the top of the grand staircase, his expression shifting from confusion to horror as he took in the scene below. What they couldn't know, what none of them could possibly understand, was that I had died in this very spot 3 months ago. Murdered, actually, though they'd made it look like an accident. Clarissa had pushed me down these same marble stairs after I'd discovered their plan to frame me for embezzling from father's company. The impact had killed me instantly, my blood pooling around the base of that cursed vase. But death, it turned out, wasn't the end of my story. I had awakened in my childhood bedroom 6 months earlier, 17 years old again, with every memory of my previous life intact. The memories of 23 years of systematic abuse, manipulation, and ultimately murder. I remembered how they'd isolated me from friends, sabotaged my grades, stolen my achievements, and finally killed me when I'd grown too inconvenient to their plans. But I also remembered something else, something I'd only learned in my final moments as I lay dying. The vase wasn't just a family heirloom, it was a luck reservoir, a mystical artifact that had been collecting and concentrating good fortune for our bloodline for over 300 years. Every stroke of success, every business deal, every advantageous marriage, it all flowed through that ancient ceramic vessel. And I had just destroyed it. My rebirth had come with an unexpected gift, the ability to see the invisible threads of fortune that connected people to their fates. I could watch luck flow like golden streams from the vase to my family members, strengthening their every endeavor while leaving me perpetually drained. The vase had been siphoning my natural fortune and redistributing it to them my entire life. The history of my suffering stretched back to the day I was born. My mother, my real mother, had died in childbirth, and within a year, my father had remarried Victoria, a woman with a daughter just 2 years older than me. From the beginning, Victoria had made it clear that I was an unwelcome reminder of his first wife. My earliest memories were of being locked in closets while Clarissa got dance lessons, of wearing hand-me-downs while my stepsister received designer clothes, of eating leftovers in the kitchen while they dined on gourmet meals in the formal dining room. When I excelled in school, my accomplishments were dismissed as trying too hard to compensate. When Clarissa struggled, tutors and expensive prep courses materialized overnight. The financial abuse had been systematic and devastating. My mother had left me a substantial trust fund, but Victoria had convinced my father that giving me access to it would make me spoiled and entitled. Instead, they used my inheritance to fund Clarissa's lifestyle while I worked part-time jobs just to afford basic necessities. Every birthday, every Christmas, every achievement was minimized, while Clarissa's mediocrity was celebrated as brilliance. The emotional manipulation had been even worse. They had convinced me that I was difficult, ungrateful, and inherently flawed. When I tried to speak up about the unfair treatment, I was labeled as jealous and dramatic. When I withdrew to protect myself, I was called antisocial and concerning. They had created a narrative where my very existence was problematic, where my pain was proof of my defective character. The breaking point had come when I discovered their embezzlement scheme. Victoria and Clarissa had been systematically draining my trust fund and my father's business accounts, funneling money through shell companies and fake invoices. When I'd tried to expose them, they'd turned it around, planting evidence that made it look like I was the thief. My father, completely under Victoria's influence, had believed them without question. That's when they decided I was too dangerous to live. But now I was back, armed with foreknowledge and the understanding of how their power truly worked. I had spent 6 months carefully observing the flow of fortune from the vase, documenting every business deal it influenced, every lucky break it provided. I had watched my father's companies prosper while their competitors failed mysteriously. I had seen Clarissa win competitions she had no business winning, land jobs she wasn't qualified for, attract suitors far above her station, and I had planned meticulously for this moment. The decision to destroy the vase hadn't been impulsive. I had spent weeks studying the mystical theory behind luck reservoirs, researching our family history in dusty archive libraries, and confirming my suspicions about the artifact's true nature. The vase was indeed the source of their supernatural fortune, but it was also my prison. As long as it existed, my natural luck would continue to be harvested and redistributed to them. Breaking it wouldn't just end their advantage, it would release decades of accumulated fortune back into the natural flow of the universe. And since I was the only blood relative in the house who had been systematically denied access to the vase's benefits, that released luck would naturally flow to me. The plan had required perfect timing. I had needed to ensure that all of their major schemes were in motion when I struck, so that the sudden loss of mystical support would cause maximum damage. I had waited until Clarissa had signed the contracts for her modeling career, contracts that were far too generous for someone with her limited talent. I had waited until Victoria had committed to several high-risk investments that relied on supernatural good fortune to succeed. I had waited until my father had leveraged his entire empire on deals that needed mystical intervention to close properly. And then I had simply accidentally knocked the vase off its perch while dusting the mantelpiece. "You stupid, clumsy girl!" Victoria screamed, dropping to her knees among the fragments. "Do you have any idea what this was worth? This vase has been in our family for 347 years," I interrupted. "Acquired by Jonathan Whitmore in 1677 from a Chinese mystic who warned him that it would bring great fortune to his bloodline, but would demand a terrible price if ever broken." I tilted my head, studying her pale face. "Funny how you never mentioned that part of the story." Victoria's eyes went wide. Where did you learn about our family's real history?" "Oh, Victoria, I've had a lot of time to research. A lot of time to discover the truth about many things." I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a whisper. "Including the truth about what you and Clarissa have been doing with my trust fund." The blood drained from her face completely. Behind her, Clarissa made a small, strangled sound. My father finally reached the bottom of the stairs, his face flushed with anger. "Elena, what is the meaning of this? That vase was priceless. It's been in our family for generations." "Yes, father, it has. And it's been stealing from me for 17 years. I turned to face him directly, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. But that's about to change. Everything is about to change. The first sign that the vase's destruction was having an effect came within hours. Victoria's phone rang just as we finished cleaning up the shattered remains, and I watched her face crumble as she received the news that her latest investment, a sure thing that she had mortgaged our vacation home to finance, had collapsed due to an unexpected scandal involving the company's CEO. Clarissa's modeling contract was canceled the next morning. The agency called to inform her that they had reviewed her portfolio and decided she wasn't the right fit for their brand after all. The generous signing bonus would need to be returned immediately. By the end of the week, my father's business empire was in freefall. 3 major deals that had been guaranteed successes imploded spectacularly. His most reliable clients began backing out of contracts, citing budget concerns and strategic shifts. Partners who had been eager to work with him suddenly became unreachable. But while their world crumbled, mine began to bloom. The acceptance letter from Harvard arrived first, the scholarship I had applied for but never expected to receive. Then came the call from the law firm that had been investigating financial irregularities in my father's companies. They had found evidence of the embezzlement scheme and wanted to know if I had any information about unauthorized access to my trust fund. I had quite a lot of information, actually. The investigation moved swiftly once I provided the documentation I had secretly gathered over the years. Bank records, forged signatures, financial statements that didn't match. Everything I had carefully preserved in a safety deposit box that Victoria didn't know existed. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Victoria and Clarissa were arrested on a Tuesday morning. I watched from my bedroom window as they were led away in handcuffs, their faces pale with shock and disbelief. Victoria kept looking back at the house as if she couldn't understand how their fortress of privilege had collapsed so completely. My father stood in the doorway, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The investigation had revealed that, while he hadn't been directly involved in the embezzlement, his willful blindness and negligent oversight made him liable for millions in damages. The business that had been built on supernatural good fortune couldn't survive without it. Within a month, he was forced to declare bankruptcy. But my real victory wasn't their downfall, it was what rose from the ashes. The trust fund that Victoria had been systematically draining was restored in full, with interest and penalties that nearly doubled its value. The insurance payouts from my father's failed businesses, combined with the sale of assets to cover his debts, resulted in a substantial settlement in my favor. But more than that, opportunities began presenting themselves in ways that could only be described as magical. The university scholarship led to internships that led to job offers. The law firm that had handled my case offered me a position as a paralegal while I completed my studies. Investments I made with my restored trust fund seemed to turn to gold overnight. People who had never noticed me before suddenly found themselves drawn to help me, to mentor me, to open doors I hadn't even known existed. The luck that had been stolen from me for 17 years was returning with interest. 6 months after the Vase's destruction, I stood in the penthouse office of my new law firm, looking out over the city that was rapidly becoming mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now working in corporate law, specializing in cases involving financial fraud and family corruption. My reputation for uncovering hidden assets and exposing embezzlement schemes was already legendary among my colleagues. Victoria's trial had been swift and decisive. The evidence was so overwhelming that she had been forced to accept a plea deal that sent her to prison for 15 years. Clarissa, who had been deemed a co-conspirator rather than a mastermind, received 8 years. Both were ordered to pay full restitution, which meant selling everything they owned and working prison jobs for pennies on the dollar to slowly chip away at their massive debt. My father had aged 20 years and 6 months. The bankruptcy had forced him to sell the family mansion, the same mansion where I had died and been reborn. I had bought it through a shell company, letting him live there as a caretaker while I decided what to do with it. Every day he was reminded of how completely his world had changed, how the daughter he had dismissed and neglected now controlled his fate. But I wasn't cruel, I wasn't vindictive, I was simply balanced. One evening, I found him sitting in his old study, staring at the empty space where the vase had once stood. He looked up when I entered, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and bewilderment. "I don't understand how it all went so wrong so quickly," he said quietly. "We had everything. The business was thriving. Victoria's investments were paying off. Clarissa was building her career. And then you broke that vase, and it all just fell apart." I settled into the chair across from him, the same chair where I had once sat as a child, begging him to notice me, to love me, to choose me over his new family. "Father, do you remember what you said to me when I was 12 and I told you about the bullying at school?" He frowned, clearly struggling with the memory. "You said that life wasn't fair and that I needed to learn to work harder if I wanted good things to happen to me. You said that Clarissa didn't have problems because she was naturally gifted, naturally likable, naturally lucky." I leaned forward slightly. "You were right about one thing, life isn't fair, but you were wrong about the rest." "I don't understand." "The vase, Father. That beautiful, ancient, mystical vase that brought our family such incredible fortune. Do you know what the Chinese mystic told Jonathan Whitmore when he acquired it?" My father shook his head. "He told him that the vase would collect luck from one member of the bloodline to distribute to the others. That it would create incredible fortune for the family by concentrating all the natural good luck into a single vessel. But he also warned that if the source was ever completely depleted, if the person being drained was pushed too far, the vase would become unstable. And if it was destroyed while unstable." I smiled. "Well, all that accumulated luck would flow back to its original source." The understanding dawned in his eyes slowly, followed by horror. "I was that source, Father. For 17 years, that vase drained my natural fortune and gave it to you, to Victoria, to Clarissa. Every success you celebrated, every lucky break you experienced, every opportunity that fell into your laps, it all came from me. And when you finally decided that I was too much trouble to keep around, when Victoria and Clarissa murdered me, I paused, watching his face. Well, let's just say the universe decided it was time for the debt to be repaid. Murdered you? Elena, what are you talking about? You're sitting right here. Am I? I stood up, and for just a moment, I let him see the truth. The ghostly outline of the girl who had died on the marble stairs, the spectral form that had clawed its way back from death through sheer force of will and accumulated injustice. Or am I exactly what 17 years of stolen luck looks like when it comes home to roost? He fell back in his chair, his face white with terror. Don't worry, Father. I'm not here for revenge. Revenge implies anger, and I'm not angry anymore. I'm just restored, balanced. Everything that was taken from me has been returned with interest. I walked toward the door, then paused. You can continue living here as long as you need to. Consider it a kindness from the daughter you never bothered to know. Elena, wait. I turned back to him one last time. You said life wasn't fair, and you were right. But what you never understood is that unfairness has a way of correcting itself. Sometimes it just takes a little help. I left him there in his study, staring at the empty space where his family's fortune had once resided, finally understanding the true cost of the privilege he had taken for granted. 2 years later, I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law School. The university had offered me a full professorship, but I had declined in favor of starting my own practice. My specialty was representing victims of family financial abuse, and my success rate was unprecedented. Some said I had an almost supernatural ability to uncover hidden assets and expose complex fraud schemes. They weren't wrong. My law firm occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in the city's financial district. The building's lobby featured a beautiful fountain, surrounded by comfortable seating areas where clients could wait in luxury and dignity, many of them coming to me after years of being told they were worthless, undeserving, or naturally unlucky. I understood their pain intimately. Victoria and Clarissa had been released on parole after serving their minimum sentences, but their lives bore no resemblance to their former luxury. Victoria worked as a night shift cleaner in an office building, her arthritis making every hour an agony. The stress of prison and poverty had aged her dramatically. She looked like a woman 20 years older than her actual age. Clarissa had found work as a waitress in a diner on the outskirts of town. Her beauty had faded quickly under the harsh fluorescent lights and constant stress of minimum wage work. She had gained weight, lost her teeth to poor nutrition and lack of dental care, and developed a nervous tic that made her unsuitable for any job requiring customer interaction. They both lived in a cramped studio apartment in the worst part of the city, sharing a single bed and surviving on ramen noodles and food bank donations. Every month, a significant portion of their earnings went toward restitution payments that would continue for the rest of their lives. But I wasn't finished with them yet. The really beautiful part of destroying the luck reservoir was that it didn't just redirect fortune. It created a kind of karmic vacuum around those who had been artificially benefiting from it. They didn't just lose their supernatural good luck, they became actively unlucky. Small disasters followed them constantly. They missed buses by seconds, dropped food on the floor, got caught in every rainstorm, suffered minor injuries with a suspicious frequency. Victoria had been mugged 3 times in 2 years, losing what little money she had managed to save. Clarissa had been in 4 minor car accidents, none of them technically her fault, but all of them costly. Their landlord had raised their rent twice. The local grocery store had stopped accepting their food stamps due to computer errors, and their electricity was shut off at least once a month due to billing mistakes. Meanwhile, my life had become a masterpiece of perfect timing and golden opportunities. The law firm's success had attracted the attention of several major investment groups who wanted to back my expansion into international markets. My personal investments had grown exponentially, creating a fortune that dwarfed even what my family had possessed at their peak. I owned properties in 7 countries, had been featured on the covers of 3 major business magazines, and had been invited to speak at conferences around the world. But more importantly, I had found peace. The anger that had consumed me for so many years, the rage at being overlooked, dismissed, and ultimately murdered, had been replaced by a quiet satisfaction that felt remarkably like contentment. I had proven that their narrative about me was false. I wasn't difficult, ungrateful, or inherently flawed. I was simply a person who had been systematically robbed of her natural advantages and had finally reclaimed them. The letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon, delivered by courier to my office. The envelope was cream-colored and expensive, with my father's initials embossed in the corner. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in his familiar handwriting. Elena, I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what we did, what I allowed to happen. I know that saying I'm sorry isn't enough, that it can never be enough. But I need you to know that I understand now. I understand what that vase was, what it took from you, what we took from you. Victoria and Clarissa will be at the courthouse next Tuesday for their parole hearing. They're trying to get permission to move to another state, to start over somewhere else. I thought you should know. I also thought you should know that I'm dying. The doctors say it's cancer, but I think it's really guilt. I think it's 20 years of living a lie finally catching up with me. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've become. And I'm sorry I was too blind to see who you really were when it mattered. Your father, Richard, I read the letter 3 times, then set it aside and returned to work. There was a case I was preparing. A young woman whose stepfamily had been draining her inheritance while convincing her she was mentally incompetent. The parallels to my own story were striking, but then again, they always were. The courthouse was busy on Tuesday morning. I arrived early and took a seat in the back of the courtroom, watching as Victoria and Clarissa were let in for their hearing. They looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by years of hard labor and constant stress. Victoria's hair had gone completely gray, and Clarissa walked with a slight limp from one of her many accidents. They didn't see me at first. They were focused on their lawyer, a overworked public defender who was clearly going through the motions. The hearing was routine. They had served their time, paid their restitution as ordered, and were requesting permission to relocate for better job opportunities. The judge was reviewing their paperwork when Victoria's eyes found mine across the courtroom. I watched her face go pale, then red, then pale again. She whispered something to Clarissa, who turned to look at me with an expression of pure hatred. I smiled and gave them a small wave. Your Honor, the public defender was saying, my clients have been model prisoners and have complied with all terms of their parole. They're simply seeking an opportunity to rebuild their lives in a location with better employment prospects. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Miss Whitmore, Miss Chen, you understand that relocating would mean starting your restitution payments over with a new monitoring system? And that any violation of your parole terms would result in immediate incarceration? Yes, Your Honor, Victoria said quietly. We understand. Very well, motion granted. You have 30 days to... Your Honor? I stood up and every head in the courtroom turned toward me. I apologize for interrupting, but I believe I have information relevant to this case. The judge frowned. And you are? Elena Whitmore. I'm the victim in this case, the person whose trust fund was embezzled by the defendants. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Victoria and Clarissa both looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Miss Whitmore, do you have an objection to the defendant's relocation request? I walked slowly toward the front of the courtroom, my heels clicking on the marble floor. Not an objection, Your Honor, more of an opportunity. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a folder. I've been following the defendant's case closely, and I've noticed that they've been having some difficulty finding stable employment. I'd like to offer them jobs. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. What kind of jobs? The judge asked carefully. Cleaning services, I said, handing the folder to the bailiff. I own several commercial properties that require night shift cleaning crews. The work is hard, the hours are long, and the pay is exactly minimum wage. But it's honest work, and it would allow them to meet their restitution obligations while remaining under local supervision. Victoria's face had gone ashen. Elena, you can't... Miss Chen, the judge said sharply, you will not speak unless addressed by the court. I continued as if she hadn't spoken. The positions would require them to work 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, with 2 weeks of unpaid vacation. They would be responsible for cleaning office buildings, medical facilities, and law firms. They would be supervised at all times and subject to performance reviews every 30 days. This is very generous of you, Miss Whitmore, the judge said, though he looked puzzled by my motivations. Oh, it's not generosity, Your Honor. It's justice. I turned to look directly at Victoria and Clarissa. You see, these two women spent years teaching me that hard work was the only way to earn good things in life. They told me that I wasn't naturally lucky, naturally gifted, or naturally deserving of success. They convinced me that if I wanted anything in this world, I would have to work harder than everyone else to get it. I smiled at them, the same cold smile I had given them the day I destroyed the vase. I'm simply offering them the opportunity to practice what they preached. The judge approved my proposal immediately. Victoria and Clarissa were ordered to report to work the following Monday, beginning a schedule that would consume their lives for the foreseeable future. Their request to relocate was denied, with the court noting that they now had stable employment that would allow them to fulfill their obligations locally. As we left the courthouse, Victoria grabbed my arm in the hallway. Elena, please, haven't we suffered enough? We're sorry, we're so sorry for what we did. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. Victoria, do you remember what you told me when I was 15 and I asked if I could apply for that art scholarship? She frowned, clearly not remembering. You said that scholarships were for talented people, and that I shouldn't waste everyone's time pretending to be something I wasn't. You said I should focus on being realistic about my limitations and work harder to compensate for my lack of natural ability. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I'm just helping you be realistic about your own limitations. You're not naturally lucky anymore. You're not naturally gifted. You're certainly not naturally deserving of success. So you'll need to work harder to compensate. I straightened my jacket and picked up my briefcase. Much harder. But Elena, you start Monday at midnight. Don't be late. I left them standing in the courthouse hallway, their faces reflecting the same hopeless despair I had carried for so many years. But unlike them, I had found a way to transform that despair into something powerful and beautiful. 5 years later, I stood in the ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel, accepting an award for my work in family justice law. The room was filled with judges, attorneys, politicians, and business leaders, all the people who had once dismissed me as the troubled daughter of a failed businessman. My father had died 3 years earlier, alone in the mansion that was now officially mine. I had paid for his funeral and had his body interred in the family mausoleum next to my mother's grave. It was the last act of kindness I owed him. Victoria and Clarissa were still working for me, still cleaning my buildings every night, still paying off their restitution one minimum wage dollar at a time. They had aged rapidly under the stress of constant labor and perpetual bad luck. Victoria had developed a persistent cough that made her unfit for most jobs, while Clarissa's nervous tic had evolved into a full-blown anxiety disorder that left her barely functional in social situations. But they were still alive, still working, still learning the lessons they had tried so hard to teach me. As I gave my acceptance speech, I caught sight of myself in the ballroom's mirrored walls. I looked nothing like the broken, neglected girl I had been. I was elegant, confident, successful. Everything they had tried to convince me I could never become. Family, I told the audience, is supposed to be our foundation, our support system, our source of unconditional love. But sometimes, family can be our greatest obstacle to growth and success. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones we most need protection from. The audience nodded appreciatively. Many of them had probably experienced some version of family dysfunction themselves. When I was young, I was taught that I was naturally unlucky, naturally difficult, naturally unworthy of the good things in life. I was told that if I wanted anything, I would have to work twice as hard as everyone else to get it because I wasn't naturally gifted like other people. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the room. It took me many years to realize that this narrative was false. I wasn't naturally unlucky, my luck was being stolen. I wasn't naturally difficult. I was responding normally to abnormal treatment. I wasn't naturally unworthy. I was being systematically devalued by people who benefited from my diminished sense of self-worth. The applause was thunderous. Today, my practice focuses on helping people reclaim what was stolen from them, whether that's money, property, dignity, or simply the right to believe in their own worth. Because justice isn't just about punishment. It's about restoration. It's about returning things to their natural order. As I left the podium, I felt the familiar warmth of perfectly aligned fortune flowing through my life. Every handshake led to a new opportunity. Every conversation opened a new door. Every smile I received was genuine, earned through my own merit rather than supernatural manipulation. This was what natural luck felt like. Not the artificial concentration of stolen fortune, but the organic flow of earned success. It was beautiful, sustainable, and completely mine. That night, I returned to the mansion that had once been my prison. I walked through the halls where I had been ignored, dismissed, and ultimately murdered, feeling nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. The house was mine now, transformed from a symbol of my powerlessness into a monument to my victory. I stopped in front of the mantelpiece where the vase had once stood. In its place, I had installed a simple glass case containing a single object, a small fragment of blue and white ceramic, the only piece of the luck reservoir I had kept. It served as a reminder not of what I had destroyed, but of what I had reclaimed. The fragment caught the light from the chandelier above, casting rainbow patterns on the wall like scattered jewels. It was beautiful in its brokenness, powerful in its simplicity, perfect in its imperfection, just like me. I had been broken by my family's cruelty, shattered by their betrayal, destroyed by their greed. But from those fragments, I had built something new, something stronger, something more beautiful, something entirely my own. The girl who had died on these marble stairs was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who understood that sometimes the most profound justice isn't punishment or revenge. It's simply allowing the natural order of things to reassert itself. I was no longer the victim of my family's story. I was the author of my own. And this story, unlike the one they had tried to write for me, had a truly happy ending.